All right, chapter 17. So yay, last chapter, you're almost done. And for this chapter, it is probably one of the easiest ones because you've actually already learned this stuff. So this chapter is more like a review chapter covering the different hormones that you've already learned with some of the organ systems that we've covered before. So basically this should be a review or hopefully a, oh, now I get it. So this should be a fairly easy chapter for you. All right, so the chapter 17 is all about the endocrine system. So the endocrine system is a bunch of different glands, tissues, and cells that secrete hormones. So we have here in the brain, the bigger one, your pituitary gland, then your pineal gland, so a little tiny, tiny blue dot, which I'll zoom in on for you guys. Focus. Sort of. Okay. So the pituitary gland there, and then the pineal gland back there. Then moving to your throat chest region, having your thyroid glands in your neck, parathyroid glands behind them. There you go. Then your thymus, that is near your heart. Then pancreas. Then the adrenal glands on top of the kidneys themselves. And then, of course, our gonads, so our ovaries or testicles, depending on the reproductive system. And then there's some other tissues that help, but those are your major glands that function in the endocrine system. So the jobs of these glands and tissues are produce hormones. So hormones, again, are chemical messengers that are transported throughout the bloodstream. So even though you might have a hormone that is produced here in your pituitary gland, by traveling through the bloodstream, it's actually able to affect multiple regions throughout the body. Same thing with your other hormones. Being released into the bloodstream, able to have far-reaching and very distant effects due to being able to travel through the bloodstream. So there's two types of glands. You have your exocrine glands, which will exit out of the gland using a duct system. So think exo for exit. So they use a duct. The secretion will be made in that gland, and then using a duct to get it to a external surface. So even if that external surface may be, for example, inside the lumen of the stomach or to outside surfaces of the body, still exocrine gland carrying a duct away from the gland and out to an external surface. For your endocrine glands, so remaining inside, so endo inside, think of that. There's no duct system. So these glands have a lot of capillaries that are fenestrated, so having these very large opening so that the hormones that are made can enter into the bloodstream, travel along the bloodstream, and having the long distance effects. So exocrine glands usually have an extracellular effect, so something on the outside. Endocrine glands, their hormones usually have an intracellular effect, so binding to a cell and then causing a change in that cell from binding to that receptor. So depending on your transport system, it's either very quick and direct, like in the nervous system. So, for example, hormones being made by a particular neuron, traveling through a axon on the neuron, and then being released from the synaptic gap right onto the target. So very quick and very direct. For most of your endocrine system, so let's say this is our gland here, making our hormone, which is the little green dots all over the place, traveling through the bloodstream, so could be long distance till finally getting to the target cells that are here, where those hormones will bind to receptors on those cells and have their internal effect. Alright, so starting in the brain, you have the pituitary gland, so hanging off the base of the brain is the pituitary gland. It is your major center for hormone production and secretion throughout the entire body, and I'll show you later having effects all over the body. So the pituitary has two parts. In the darker brown color here, we have the anterior pituitary, so anterior being the front one. And then you have on this lighter side, which we'll talk about in a second, is the posterior pituitary. So the anterior pituitary actually produces hormones and then secretes them from the anterior pituitary region, so into capillaries where they're traveled along and sit throughout the rest of the body. It also secretes some hormones that are also made in the hypothalamus. For your posterior pituitary, it doesn't produce hormones itself, but it does secrete hormones from the hypothalamus region. So up here, a little bit closer on the brain. So here's our little zoomed in portion. Pituitary is there, then hypothalamus is above it. So going back to our anterior pituitary, so the anterior pituitary produces 6 principal hormones that have effects all over the body. So we'll go through those. So you have your prolactin in this yellow here affecting the mammary gland, so affecting its production. See, prolactin. Then your thyroid stimulating hormone, very simple name, stimulates the thyroid. Then here your luteinizing hormone and your follicle stimulating hormone, so LH for short, FSH for short for these two, either affecting the testes in the male reproductive system or the ovaries in the female reproductive system. Then you have your adrenocorticotropic hormone affecting the adrenal cortex, so the glands that are above the kidneys. And then lastly, your growth hormone and your growth hormone affecting both your liver and your fat. So all these different targets are affected by hormones that are produced in the pituitary right below the brain. So moving on to a small but still very important gland in the brain. So here's our hypothalamus region, and this has unfortunately been cut out, but here it would be your pituitary. So a little bit further back, still very deep within the brain, is the pineal gland. So we don't really know exactly how it works, but we think just from looking at studies, looking at its size and how it changes throughout life, we think it might influence the timing of puberty. So by the end of puberty, it has shrunken down the size. So honey, I shrunk the gland. Of course, you have to be pretty old to remember that movie, which includes me. So that process is called involution. So the shrinking, by the end of puberty, it's down by 75%. It also produces a hormone called melatonin, which you also can buy over the counter in different little vitamin forms, or even I think Advil PM or the Tylenol. One of those has the melatonin in it, so it's painkiller, also helps you to sleep as well. So the levels of melatonin help to affect your circadian rhythm. So remembering the rhythms that govern your awakeness or alert levels throughout the day. So, for example, people who are in winter, heavy winter regions or in northern climates where they're not getting enough sunlight, sometimes they end up having seasonal affective disorder because they have higher levels of melatonin. Can cause depression, sleepiness, irritability, and carbohydrate craving. So for these people, making sure that they're getting at least 2 to 3 hours of bright light each day will help reduce the melatonin levels and therefore reducing the symptoms of seasonal affective disorder. So this exposure to bright light, usually having a little bit of UV in there as well, is called phototherapy, particularly in very high northern regions where their days become extremely short or so short that they never see the sun. Some people actually have their own little UV lamps with them, not necessarily walking around with them, but maybe at their desk at work, so that they're making sure they're getting enough sunlight. And some people even do this if they have like a internal office where they don't have an outside window, having that lamp will at least help to reduce the melatonin levels and help them to stay alert. So skipping ahead a bunch, dropping all the way down to right above the kidneys, you have your adrenal glands, and focusing on the adrenal medulla, so the more internal portion of that gland. So zooming in on that. So your adrenal medulla works as an endocrine gland, so secreting hormones into the bloodstream, as well as being a ganglion of the sympathetic nervous system. So this is where those neurons from the sympathetic nervous system will synapse right there on the target to be close by to send their signal for adjusting for different levels of activity. So if you remember from last semester, you have your sympathetic nervous system and your parasympathetic nervous system. So again, your sympathetic nervous system is your fight or flight autonomic nervous system, so one getting you ready for action. So your adrenal medulla secretes your epinephrine and norepinephrine, so also called your adrenaline and noradrenaline, basically getting the body ready for some kind of activity or being physical so that you can either fight or fight or flight, so you're running away, causing your increased blood pressure, so increasing blood flow around the body, particularly focusing on the muscles, increasing your heart rate so that you're getting that blood flow going around, increasing your pulmonary airflow, so increasing your breathing so you can get that oxygen that you need so that your cells can produce high levels of ATP, and also increasing the metabolic rate. So again, making sure that you have your energy and you're using it to do whatever activity that you need. Again, effects from your sympathetic nervous system, so adjusting blood flow to certain areas, so decreasing blood flow to your digestive tract helps to decrease digestion, as well as decreasing of your urine production, so stopping those systems so that as you're fighting or flighting, you don't have to stop and poop or pee. So basically focus on that initial situation. So moving to the outer layer of the adrenal gland, being the adrenal cortex. So one of the jobs of the adrenal cortex is to produce your sex steroids. So the steroids that they produce are your androgens, again setting your libido or sex drive throughout your life. These also play a role in prenatal male development, since of course the testes are still being developed, so having these already being produced from that area helps to develop the fetus into a male. And another sex steroid that it does produce is estradiol, so one of the major forms of estrogen. So it becomes very important after menopause. So menopause, the woman has gone through climacteric. She no longer has eggs. Her reproductive system is no longer going through its monthly cycle, and the reproductive system starts, in a sense, sort of shutting down, if you will. So what happens during this is the ovaries start producing less estrogen, so all of the estrogens. So this can affect not only her metabolism of her body, but also her bone mass. So this is why, grandma is wrapped up in, a turtleneck and 2 sweaters in the middle of July, because her metabolism's gone down, so she's not able to keep up her core body temperature, as well as older women, particularly seeing them, as well as older men as well, but they start getting kind of more hunched back, and they start shrinking because they're starting to lose bone, because they don't have the estrogen to maintain their bone levels or bone strength, and so that starts deteriorating. So estradiol from the adrenal cortex help to sustain bone mass, so it doesn't completely degenerate. And another thing for some women in menopause, they'll start taking estradiol, usually in a patch format, to again counter the effects of menopause. So speaking of the reproductive tract, yeah, we just talked about this. Okay, so again, Both your ovaries and your testes are your primary sex organs. They produce both a endocrine product and a exocrine product. So they're exocrine products, so something that's going to exit the system, are the whole cells, which are either the eggs made from the ovaries or the sperm from the testes. Their endocrine product are all the different gonadal hormones, which are mostly steroids. So for your ovarian hormones, again, your estradiol, so your main form of estrogen, as well as progesterone and inhibin. And your testicular hormones, so your testosterone, some of your weaker androgens, some estrogen, and inhibin as well. So just reminding you, in the ovary, the corpus luteum, so after you've had ovulation and then that follicle starts to degenerate into the corpus luteum. The corpus luteum is the one that is producing the progesterone. Okay, last thing we're going to talk about is the production of your vitamin D, something that was covered in AP1, so definitely kind of a dusting off of the information. So if you remember from AP1, the first step in vitamin D synthesis is the skin using the UV radiation from the sun to convert a cholesterol-like steroid into cholecalciferol. Then it moves from the cholecalciferol moves into the liver to be converted into calcidiol. And then, of course, your liver also does a bunch of other stuff. So producing angiotensin for blood pressure, erythropoietin for stimulating your bone marrow to produce red blood cells. IGF-1, which is a type of growth factor, controls the action of your growth hormone. And then hepcidin to promote iron absorption in the liver. But going back to vitamin D, so skin does the first step, liver does the second step, third step done in your kidneys. So finally converting calcidiol to calcitriol, which is the active form of vitamin D, which is necessary to absorb calcium by the intestines. So making sure that you have your vitamin D when you're having, for example, like your dairy products, so that your intestines can absorb that calcium from whatever you've eaten or drinking, whatever, so that your body can use it. So kidneys also do other stuff just like your liver. So again, converting tensiogen from the liver to angiotensin 1. Eventually, that gets converted to angiotensin 2, dealing with blood pressure, and also produces erythropoietin, so stimulation of your red blood cells. So that's it. So you're done for your AP2 material, so just study hard. Again, if you do have to take the final exam, making sure to do your study guide. I've seen a lot of people who, do very well, where they focused on the study guides, got that last final exam score fairly high, and was able to pull out quite a few extra points. So do well, you've done, so go and be awesome.